It's been a few days since the announcement that Sacrificial will become queen, and the king's council is still trying to convince his majesty to reconsider his choice, saying how this would cause a huge uproar among his people and the nobility, stating how the queen has always been a woman of noble birth, and his wanting a humanized queen was simply not an option. While his majesty and his council continue to talk, Sacrificial is once again walking around the palace, and is abruptly stopped by his majesty and taken back to their shared room, where he explains that there is a barrier surrounding his room, and nothing can get in, which means that Sacrificial will be safe when he's not with her, so she should keep herself entertained in this room. He then tells her that a banquet will be held with the extended royal family and the nobility, where he will formally present her as the woman he has chosen to be his queen, and that this was suggested by the council, in hopes that the strong opposition that he will receive will be enough to make him no longer want Sacrificial to be his queen. Later, when his majesty returns, he finds that Sacrificial has made a lot of fake flowers, to both pass the time and to bring a little cheerfulness into the room. His majesty then states how he and these fake flowers are alike, since they both pretend to be something that they are not. Sacrificial then says that so long as they're able to evoke a feeling from someone, they are no different than the real thing. She then states that he's more like a bumblebee than a fake flower, since both the bumblebee and his majesty work hard for the sake of others, and though they both seem scary, they're actually quite gentle. She sees the beauty behind their devotion to their work, and says that to her, his majesty is not a fake king, given all that he does for his people. Finally, the day of the banquet arrives, and all of the nobility is anxiously waiting to see his majesty and the woman he intends to make queen. And once they see Sacrificial, they are all stunned and are quick to judge her human appearance and lack of fur. His majesty is quick to silence them, and Sacrificial does her part to appear dignified. When everyone is eating, Sacrificial decides to see what Sai and Klops are doing, much to the annoyance of Chancellor Anubis. And when Sacrificial returns with wine for the king to taste, a lizard noble attempts to make his majesty become angry at Sacrificial by causing her to accidentally trip, causing the wine to spill on his majesty. This caused the opposite reaction than intended. Since Sacrificial also had wine on herself, his majesty simply licked some wine off her face, and thanked her for giving him a taste. The lizard noble then asks the king if he is alright, only for his majesty to lift him off the ground by his tail, and says that he knows Sacrificial tripped because of his tail, and fully intended on taking his life, when Sacrificial stops him. After the banquet, Sacrificial is upset for having caused his majesty to become angry on her behalf. Suddenly, a light appears below her feet, and she is carried away by his majesty and his holy beast familiar. His majesty then explains that when he himself is feeling down, flying in the sky with his familiar helps to lift his spirits, hoping that it will lift Sacrificial. To his majesty's surprise, Sacrificial tells him that she thought for a moment that he had brought her so high up in the sky to get rid of her, since she is nothing more than a burden to him. He then calls her a fool and says she is not a burden. She is as vital as any other limb in his body, and is far from useless. Sacrificial then says that he cares a lot for his people, and she knows that he does not want to hurt them like he almost did today. And if he keeps her by his side intent on making her queen, he will have to confront his people many times. To which his majesty says that if it does come to that, she will be there to stop him from hurting anyone. After having landed far from the castle, his majesty says that when he is with her, he is able to unburden himself with the duties that come from being king, and with her by his side, he may one day be able to truly become a strong king. He then asks that she call him by the name that she chose for him, which she does. She then kisses him on the nose. I really like how in this chapter we see a little more of his majesty's personality. He still acts tough in front of his people, but with Sacrificial, he's a little more open to saying how he really feels. Like how he's the same as the fake flower Sacrificial made. How he shows concern for Sacrificial by telling her to stay in their room, so that he can know that she is safe. And for appearance sake, and in order to lessen the beast folks' reasons to dislike her, she should refrain from calling him his name, and simply call him his majesty like everybody else. At least while they're in front of others. He also proved that she's not to be messed with in any way, be it verbal insult or physical harm. No matter whom they're from. It could be from the nobles, it could be from Chancellor Anubis. He doesn't care, you don't mess with her. And it even got to the point where he actually might have killed one of his people if he wasn't stopped by Sacrificial. And then of course in his chapter we learn that he views her as a sort of light in his life, as a way for him to be just himself and not always be the king. And just like Sacrificial sees Leonhardt as an equal and treats him as such, he does the same to her. He doesn't look down on her for anything. And we also get a chance to see that not only is Sacrificial intuitive to his majesty's feelings, but also the other way around, since his majesty was able to sense how Sacrificial was feeling without her saying anything, and decided to give her a ride upon his holy beast familiar, in hopes that it would cheer her up. He truly seems to care about Sacrificial, whereas Sacrificial herself still struggles to believe his majesty might actually care for her, and seems to think that he'll just cast her aside at any moment, besides all the evidence that points to the opposite, which does allow us to see that she really doesn't value herself highly at all. Given that she was raised as a sacrifice, and it seemed that nobody really cared for her, she really has a very low to no opinion about herself. I also really like that whenever Chancellor Anubis tried to put Sacrificial in her place, his majesty would just wave him off and call him a fool for trying to control her at all, since she wouldn't even listen to him even though he is the king, which further proves that he doesn't understand the way that she is, and he's just fine with that. Even the look he has when he looks at Sacrificial is of endearment, which is a stark contrast to Anubis' annoyed expression. She really is the fresh breath air that he needed in his life. I also continue to like Sacrificial's carefree nature and the words she uses to describe his majesty. Like if you look here, After she compares him to a bumblebee, she gives a further reason why they're similar. Because they're both round and fluffy. She really treats His Majesty just like any other person, and not someone who needs to be talked to a certain way due to their position of power. Which I believe is another reason why His Majesty took such a liking to her, since she really does what no one else in the kingdom dares to do. Speak casually to him for fear of insulting him. She does not care about that at all, she just says whatever she thinks. I also found it really funny that when the nobility first saw Sacrificial, they were quick to comment on her lack of fur, her small arms, and how she appeared close to lizards, given that they both lacked fur, to which the lizards were quick to defend themselves against such a comparison. Whom we see is actually a group who aren't looked fondly on by the other nobility. They are seen as less than others, but humans are even seen as less than them. And their reactions give us a feel for how the rest of the kingdom might react when Sacrificial being human is made public knowledge. I also found it hilarious that Sacrificial seemed to have no situational awareness when she was cleaning the wine off His Majesty with her dress, not knowing that it looked really improper and vulgar to the nobility and the servants, since she was using the front of her dress skirt to clean His Majesty rather than simply using the towel, which further proved to them that she was not fit to be queen if she did things like that without thinking of how inappropriate it might seem to others, or how it would make His Majesty feel or look in front of the nobility. The disapproval of their relationship and her becoming queen reminds me of the anime called The Genius Prince's Guide to Raising a Nation Out of Debt, since the main characters, Prince Wayne and his assistant/friend named Ninim, whom he has romantic feelings for, struggle with a similar situation. Like Sacrificial's situation, Ninim's race is highly discriminated against and looked down on by every other kingdom, and any insults or actions done against Ninim is the same as one having done those things to Prince Wayne, and he is quick to act accordingly to whomever dared speak against the woman he intends to marry. Besides these similarities, there are at least two key differences, other than the obvious that Prince Wayne is a full human and not a beast. The first difference is that Ninim is not a human nor is she a sacrifice, but a childhood friend of Prince Wayne. And the second difference is that Prince Wayne is intent on selling his kingdom off in order to be able to freely marry Ninim and live a peaceful life, whereas King Leonhard has no intention of selling his kingdom and is determined to make Sacrificial his queen and have his people accept her no matter what. His Majesty's Holy Beast Familiar is a reference to familiars in mythology. In European folklore, specifically the medieval and early modern periods, familiars, sometimes referred to as familiar spirits, were believed to be supernatural entities, typically some sort of animal that would assist witches and cunning folk in their practices of magic. Much like how His Majesty's Familiar is used to help to get him to places faster, and occasionally used for an evening ride in the sky to help him relax and remain calm and collected when he is feeling distressed in any way.